Well, good evening and welcome to each of you to Willow Avenue Mennonite Church. If we haven't met before, my name is Brian DePalma and I'm an associate pastor here at the church. Tonight's talk with Michael Kunz is a delight to be bringing to you all. Church work moves at a glacial pace. I don't know if it's quite the deep time sort of pace that Michael will talk about tonight, but church work is often slow, and conversations for this got started early in the year as a creation care team got together to think about that work here at our church. And one of the things that emerged from that was a desire from many of us to learn more about our space. The space that we inhabit, our watershed. And that's what's led to tonight, the first of our three-part series, Living Faithfully in Our Watershed. Tonight we'll hear from Michael on a natural history of our watershed. Next month we'll hear from Rachel Friesen on some ecological issues that face our watershed. And then we'll have a final session exploring watershed discipleship as a concept of what it might mean for those of us who would identify as people of faith to live faithfully in light of this particular place. So we are delighted to have each of you here tonight to learn from Michael. He will present for a little while, and then after he is done, we'll have a chance for some questions from you all. So as ideas come to mind, you think, I'd love to ask him about that, jot it down, and we'll have a time for that at the end. Without further ado, let's turn it over to Michael. Thank you, Michael. Let's welcome him.
I'm going to be looking at my wrist a lot because otherwise I'll talk the whole hour. All right, so just know that that's what I'm doing. Begin. If you love someone, you want to know their story. It's easy to talk in generalities and just to skate on the surface, but to really love someone, you have to listen. And I would say it's the same for the world around us. Nature tells stories. Sometimes this is called natural history, and it can just be stories about. Sometimes it's actual history that we're interested in. All of it is part of the story of the world that we inhabit. And so I'm happy to be able to start this watershed creation care by talking about what it is that is here and how we can get to know it better by understanding this history story. I already had one question from my friend Perry right before we started here. And he said, was that really in the San Joaquin, that picture? And actually, just like much of what I'm going to talk about, there's probably unspoken asterisks all over the place. This is a painting by Albert Bierstadt, who is a contemporary of John Muir's painting of this watershed, but that one happens to be in the Sacramento Valley, just north. But it looks a lot like it, and I love Albert Bierstadt as well as the landscapes that he paints. So let's move on. I'm going to follow in the way of someone else who probably was the most famous natural historian of our watershed. That is John Muir. And he is a person who has an immense amount of insight and love and what his good friend Jean Carr called the glacial eye. He was able to see and perceive things that many others just coasted over because he took the time to listen to nature's story. He was born in Scotland, and his family moved when he was 10 to Wisconsin. He grew up with a father who was quite religious, but not with the same sort of effusive love of nature that Muir. He fled the Civil War to Canada and looked at nature. When the Civil War was over, he started working in a factory. Running the factory was not his love. And following an injury that almost blinded him, he decided he was going to walk 1,000 miles through war-torn south, took a boat around and came to California in 1868. And when was asked, where do you want to go? He said, anywhere that's wild. So he started walking. And he walked south and over Pacheco Pass. We know that one. That is where he entered into the watershed he came to love. From Pacheco Pass, he writes, looking eastward from the summit of Pacheco Pass, one shining morning, a landscape was displayed that after all my wanderings still appears as the most beautiful I have ever beheld. At my feet lay the great Central Valley of California, level and flowery like a lake of pure sunshine, 40 miles wide, 500 miles long, and one rich furred garden of yellow composite. That valley has changed. We know that from whatever you see at Pacheco Pass and when you descend into the valley, the natural history has altered. One of the things that we'll understand is that it's always altered and will always alter, but the ways in which it alters sometimes are generative biodiversity and beauty and sometimes not. He continues in that quote, looking at above the plain of flowers, and from the eastern boundary of this vast golden flowered bed rose the mighty Sierra, miles in height, so gloriously colored and so radiant, it seemed not clothed with light, but wholly composed of it, like the walls of some celestial city. Muir has described the watershed. It is both the valley that we inhabit right here and the source of the water of the valley, the Sierras. Muir proceeded to wander through the valley and writes in My First Summer in the Sierra, his summer of going up the mountain, starting from the valley, going through the different zones of life, all the way up to the crest. And when he reaches the very crest at Mono Pass, looking down over the east side of the Sierras towards Mono Lake and the Owens Valley, he has spanned the whole course of the watershed. And this is maybe where we need to talk about what a watershed is, because it turns out that there are multiple definitions. The first is, well, it's all this area that is drained by a specific river or set of rivers, and that area is the watershed. That's normally the way we talk about it, but it turns out that was not the original definition. When watershed first comes into the English language, I think it's German Wasserscheide, it's talking about the boundary. The ridge is the watershed. And so Muir has gone from one watershed ridge to the other watershed ridge through the other definition of watershed. But we also know that watershed means something different now. It means a turning point, a deciding point, a place where things are congealing together and about to change, and it may change this way or that way. All three of these definitions of watershed are appropriate as we listen to Muir. Let's just, I can't use a pointer here because it's not going to show up. Oh, well, it almost shows up. No, it doesn't. So our watershed is that green on the bottom 3/4 of the map, as well as the tan and brown that goes to the right to the edge of the counties. Most of our counties are following the watershed in their boundaries, except for Kern that decides it's going to cross over and claim a little bit of the desert as well. But this is our physical map that we're interested in understanding. I'm going to consider the watershed to be the San Joaquin River drains. And I'm going to also point out that some people will say it's actually 2 watersheds. If you note, and I can't point to it, you can see the blue line of the San Joaquin right in the middle of this slide and curving from the Sierras around down to the west side of the valley and then up to the San Joaquin Sacramento Delta. The second watershed, as it's often defined, you see the lakes flowing into Tulare Lake. The Tulare Basin is considered another watershed. It turns out that this is a recent human-caused divide, a divorce that happened because prior to early in the 19th century, about every other year, the collected body of the biggest lake west of the Mississippi, that's fresh water in the United States, which was Tulare Lake, would fill up and then flow through the Fresno Slough into the San Joaquin. It was a single, unified watershed up till the time of Westerners coming in and beginning water diversions. So how shall we look at it? It is something that we could look at as a unit and recognize that though right now it's two different watersheds, it is still something that is a unity. Going from below sea level, where the land is subsiding due to agricultural mismanagement in the delta, to the top of Mount Whitney. So this is the watershed that Muir came to love. This is another of Albert Bierstadt's paintings. And when he came and saw Yosemite, he had already fallen in love with the Sierras. This is what he came to love. But Muir loved the watershed in more than just the places that millions of people to see. Bierstadt also is painting, probably not very accurately for the time in the 1860s, of the native tribes, such as the Miwok that inhabited the valley of Yosemite. They had already been kicked out. Early 1950s, the tribe had been, the Miwoks had been exiled from the valley, and essentially an ongoing genocide had taken what was one of the most concentrated places in the northern hemisphere of Native American population and decimated it. Now, decimate's the wrong word. Devastate is the more proper word for it. Muir met Indians, Native Americans, for the first time at that Mono Lake. And if there's anything that Muir did not really understand well, it was the way in which he was not walking in wilderness, but walking into a watershed that had been carefully and lovingly managed by the Native American tribes. So it actually was a watershed period when Muir was traveling. The genocide was just coming almost to completion at this point, and it was a watershed in transition from thousands of years of Native American management to the management that we have attempted since the late 1800s. Muir has some other things to say, though, even though I think he struggled to understand the value and impact that Native American management of the land had undertaken. He did know how to listen, to see with that glacial eye what was happening in nature and what had happened in the past, and maybe even what might happen in the future. This is a look at the largest glacier remaining in the Sierras. This is Palisade Glacier. And of course, it's rapidly receding right now. But it was Muir's first writings that pointed out that glaciers were actually inhabiting the Sierras, moving and shaping the landscape. The people that were the professionals at that time, Whitney and his geographers and surveyors, thought that they were just ice beds, not flowing glaciers. It was Muir who first comes to fame by writing about the active, dynamic nature in which glaciers shape their world. And that involves carving out boulders in one place and carrying them dozens of miles to somewhere else. Muir talks about his natural history method. He said, "This was my method of study. I drifted about from rock to rock, stream to stream, grove to grove. When I discovered a new plant, I sat down beside it for a minute or a day to make its acquaintance and try to hear what it had to say. I asked the boulders I met whence they came and whither they were going." He recognized that those markings on the bedrock and boulders that he found were the work of glaciers, what he called snowflowers, working through long periods of time over deep history. So what about that deep history? Muir did not know as much as we know now, but pieced together, if we take a very quick glance at how has the history of this place changed, just quickly, we could go back in time 70 million years and to the time of the dinosaurs. In California, you can't really see it here, but the little black dots there that you see on the right are pretty much the upper right one, the San Joaquin Valley. And the border between the continents the continent of North America and the Pacific Ocean is pretty much at the Nevada border. There was no watershed anywhere around here 70 million years ago. And through the long, loving work of plate tectonics shaping our creation, we move from a place of dinosaurs and gymnosperms and developing flowering plants beginning to come on the scene even before our California takes shape. Even 50 million years ago, the dinosaurs are gone. The Cenozoic transitions into being with mass extinctions of 3/4 of all species in many different groups of organisms. This is where I have to apologize. My last minute edits didn't get in here, so I can't tell you bit by bit, but just the overall scheme of what we see is that as we move through time, we go through the early Cenozoic, maybe 65 million years to 50 million years, and the world is much warmer than it is now around California. We're talking about maybe 10 degrees warmer, and dominated by subtropical and tropical forests, and now by large mammals that are not ones that we'd be familiar with. But by the time of about 35 million years ago, things are beginning to shift. You can see some island chains of volcanoes that are now sealing off and making a sort of a sea that's where the San Joaquin is now, and the movement of the border between sea and continent is shifting toward the west. It's now at 35 million years ago, it's cooling, but still warmer than it is now. And the tropical plants are retreating away and more temperate species occur. As we move into what's called the Miocene, we begin to see climates change. Up till now, California was sort of like the eastern US. It would not have had a Mediterranean climate. It would have been filled with many trees and kinds of vegetation that we'd associate with the southeast. But as climates change, a cold ocean current comes and begins to bring with it a slow change of cooling and seasonality that eventually gives us the Mediterranean climate that now requires totally new suites of plants and animals. As it moves, what we get is up to 15 million years ago, definitely seasonality is here. And now, I don't have it written here, but we begin to get herbaceous things. It's no longer forests, it's grasses and herbaceous creatures. And biology changes as a result. We go from horses that sort of that run on plains and graze, and the consequent collection of carnivores as well that would change. Floras are migrating in response to the climate change. There is now the beginnings of a San Andreas fault that is going to begin to shift from subduction that causes volcanoes to sort of a shifting of material west of the San Andreas to that in the east. And you can see this a little bit here as well. By 10 million years ago, the San Joaquin is an inland sea, a larger sea called the San Pablo Sea. And it's got its opening down at the south. And as things shift and the movement of the San Andreas fault material to the west begins to seal that up. And eventually what you get is an opening farther north, first through Monterey Bay, and then that gets sealed and the water finds an outlet farther north. By the time we get to just 2 to 3 million years ago, the Sierras are now at their current height, even though they've had granite underneath them that's been around for 200 million years to 80 million years. The deep batholith of granite is hiding underneath, and then as faults raise things up, the material above the granite begins to get raised by faulting. And now it's a rain shadow, and the western part of California is seasonal, but the eastern part into the Great Basin is now becoming more and more arid. And plants from all over the western half of the U.S. have to move. They got to find some place to go. And they migrate, they march, they become immigrants to California. Giant sequoias. They used to be in Idaho. They used to be in Nevada. But what happens when climates are changing? They flee, like many of us, come to California as a refuge. There are huge numbers of new species that are coming to California even before humans come, and then we get the glacial episodes. 100,000 years of cold with 10,000 years of warm, and 100,000 of cold and 10 of warm. We get successive episodes of warming and cooling, and plants have to move. Animals have to follow the plants. We get so much diversity with plants and animals migrating upslope, downslope, farther north, farther south, all trying to keep in pace with the way that the world is changing around them. And in many places, they can't move. There are particular isolated islands of habitat, like maybe you're a plant or animal that needs a particular type of rock, and that rock doesn't move, it stays there. You've got to figure out how to hang on. So in many places in California, there are refugia, places of hiding and safety, often that are stressful to other organisms that don't want to live there, and so they survive. There are even refugia on the tops of mountains at the highest peaks where the winds have kept the glaciers at bay and kept ice-free. You're going to hear from Rachel next. That has been her study. So the refugia of high-altitude plants is what she did her master's studying. So all this to say that migration to and from California is not a new thing, even before humans. This is just a different look about 5 million years ago before the rocks shifted north or the plate tectonics moved. And we ended up that inland sea turning into an inland lake, Lake Corcoran, and slowly emptying out, especially as more sediments deposit and as the climates change. So here's our look at the watershed again. And I just want to take us a tour through the river. The watershed is more than a river, but this is its artery. This is its bloodline. And this is a gift that we have here. It has been called the most misused river in the country. It is a place where biodiversity thrives because what we have are all the plants that can't tolerate the Mediterranean climate, having a refuge along a river with riparian forests that are then thick and productive and bountiful, and all the increase in animal life that occurs there as well. But the San Joaquin traditionally has its source up near the southeast corner of Yosemite, Banner and Ritter Mountains there, Thousand Island Lake at 10,000 feet, and then flowing down from there, eventually making its way to where we are. This is not a story that I think that's going to surprise people, or I think most folks would know that the San Joaquin River used to be an avenue of transportation. It was big and mighty enough for steamboats to go up and down the river. But that stopped around 1911 as more diversions occurred, and eventually, of course, as Friant Dam was constructed in the 40s, eventually changing the ecology. There are still rivers that flow in California, but most rivers are man-made aqueducts rather than natural rivers. And that has consequences. It has so many positive consequences, of course, for agriculture that sustains us economically, but it also has consequences for nature, especially when you think that until or after the Friant Dam built, what we have is a situation where the river ran completely dry until lawsuits and litigation made the first tentative steps to restore the San Joaquin. Even when other rivers north of the San Joaquin that flow into our watershed, the Merced, the Tuolumne, the Stanislaus, even as they contribute water to revive the San Joaquin, by the time it flows into the delta, what was the richest, largest wetland that supported many forms of life and humans, Native Americans there, has been channeled and dammed so much that it's hard to find anything there that is natural. And as I mentioned, with the agriculture that takes place there, it's now below sea level because the rich soils have been mined and depleted. So the worst thing that happens is if the levees break and a flood comes, we're more like the Netherlands. Here's that Tulare Lake Basin, and so how powerful are we in shaping the history of nature? Yes, we can tremendously alter the history and the characters of our watershed by totally drying out what was the largest lake in the western U.S., but we don't have as much control as we sometimes believe. This is how big Tulare Lake would be if it were to fill up, or should we say, when it fills up. As it did just last year with the tremendous water that stopped it, being able to, for us to be able to channel and to contain all of the water that's there. This is not a one-time occurrence. It's happened half a dozen times over the past 50 years or so. And so here's another look back in 1969 when the same thing happened. Of course, a watershed is more than a river, and though it sometimes looks like there's nothing natural about the rest of the watershed, it is still all intricately connected. Agriculture, of course, we understand and value it, but I will just say that agriculture can be done in many different ways. And on the left is large-scale Westlands Water District agriculture, where large corporations can own thousands of acres of subsidized land and water. And there is the family that fed our family for many years, Tom Willey, a local Madera farmer that could not get his kids to follow after him, and those who tried found doing agriculture in an organic, sustainable, non-monoculture way is not easy, but it all depends upon water. So that water, I'll just mention, has been manipulated and channeled so that most rivers are no longer natural, and you know those stories. Most of the water in the San Joaquin goes south towards Bakersfield, and a little bit goes north. And for a long time, almost none of it went down the river channel past Fresno. Now, more and more is being channeled that way for restoration. And on the other side of the Sierras, of course, water going from the Delta all the way toward our largest metropolitan area, Los Angeles, that draws water from the Colorado, from the Owens Valley, and from the Delta, sucking water in all different directions to sustain our economy and keep us going, but altering at cost the lands through which it flows. So what's a watershed? If we're talking about where the water of a river goes, the watershed goes everywhere, all the way to Los Angeles and beyond. This is Suzanne Pickering's here. Beautiful picture. And I credited it, and it's not there. It's a look at what draws us to this watershed. It is a look at just how beautiful this world can be. But is it just the landscape, or should it also be the community of life that lives there? And it's easy to talk about how, for instance, oh, I love humanity. It's people I can't stand. Famous quote from Schultz, Peanuts. Oh, yeah, in general, yeah, I love people. I love nature. I love it all. But do I love it enough to hear its story, to get to know them personally? And that's what I think is often missing when we travel to a place of beauty in landscape, but not know the inhabitants of the watershed that we share with them. So I just want to remind us about a few things, like salmon, keystone species that fed human populations for millennia and actually contributed to the ecological fertility of the valley as anadromous fish spawn up the river and bring with them in their own bodies nutrients that fertilizes the soil. This was the southernmost salmon run in North America, and it was the Yokuts called the river the salmon spearing place, yet all gone. This is another one of Rachel's things to do, also studying and being part of salmon restoration, I believe. But we're taking tentative steps to try to get there. But it's not just the river, it's also the communities of life along the river. Oak woodlands are the richest biodiverse habitat that you can find just about, and yet almost all have been lost because it's good agricultural land and people would love to live there. This is one that I did credit, Suzanne, thank you. It's not just the forests, it is also the magnificently diverse wetlands where the San Joaquin and other rivers like Tulare lakes flood each year and act as a place of refuge and restoration for migratory birds. This is one of my favorite things to do, to go to Merced and listen to the sandhill cranes who come and spend the winter here after nesting and being in Canada. Or the Ross and snow geese by the hundreds of thousands. This is our valley too, and what used to be there, but harder and harder to find. The Tule elk that used to roam, but almost were extinct, and yet restored in a few wildlife refuges that we have. These are the neighbors that we share this watershed with. And some of them are critically endangered, especially things that live in, well, we don't really need salt flats for anything, or why not just turn agriculture into 98% of the of the valley. It's because there are species, our neighbors, that depend upon that habitat. And a couple of endangered ones, for instance, the blunt-nosed leopard lizard, whose habitat is just about right here in this area, as is this one. You know about the Fresno kangaroo rat. You think, a rat? These are the cutest, furriest, bouncy little critters that you can ever see. Nothing unclean about them. They are just wonderful creatures that are so adapted to desert environments that many species of the kangaroo rat don't even need to ever drink water because they've got so many adaptations to figure out how to harvest water from their environment. But I like the animals, but the plants have been more of my interest. And our watershed has more species of plants in it than all of the eastern half of the United States. We have a biodiversity riches that we share this area with. Thousands and thousands of species. They're just going to the Native Plant Society website, and you can search for plants of any kind, and by county, by habitat, or whatever, and 4,500 species of native plants are in our watershed, out of about 6,000 something total species that are native to California. Many of them are rare. Many of them struggle to survive, especially in a world where things are changing as fast as they do. And you can see some are in particular habitats that I'll mention very briefly, but some of these are endemics. They're the ones that have figured out how to stay in place and survive through the shifts of climates. And right up here in our foothills is one of the most beautiful shrubs. I have them in my backyard. Beautiful white flowers, but nowhere but the foothills of California do you find this ancient Carpentaria tree anemone that has no other close relatives. It has been on its own in its own evolutionary path for probably tens of millions of years. But California is more than that. It not only is a refuge for paleoendemics, it is the breeding ground for neoendemics. All this isolation and separation in populations with changing environments means that the world is a great place for new species to develop. And here's just one. On Shut-Eye Peak, right up the hill here, a fawn lily. And it's just one of 18 species of lilies. Most of the species of this genus of lily are all in California. And that is our place that we share with our neighbors. Others are particular habitats, like areas that are undulating, that are bounded by impermeable substrate, like hardpan, or a lava flow of Table Mountain. And there are the vernal pools where beautiful species occur that occur nowhere else. Meadow foam is a nice one. Each spring you'll see rings of flowers that come sequentially as the pool dries out. And some of them endangered, some, well, plants and animals both. This is what Muir was searching for when he went up to the highest peaks his first summer, white mountain heather. And all of them, with the glacial eye of Muir, are as beautiful as the next. So we have this diversity because we have such a range of soils, such a range of history, life zones that take us from the top with alpine plants like this, the Polemonium that we have here. Sky Pilot is the common name, growing at the very tops of peaks, down through a subalpine where trees begin to show, like this foxtail pine, a close relative of the ancient bristlecone, on down through places dominated by red fir. The very high snowpack that we have on a good year is from the thick snows that occur at maybe 9 to 10,000 feet here. down into the lower montane, where, for instance, you find this other paleo-endemic that everyone comes to see, the giant sequoias. And this one, just a reminder. It's a place where we have fire as an integral part of the ecology. Ever since the Mediterranean climate has developed over millions of years, fire has been a close associate with the thriving of various species of trees, including the sequoias. And without that fire, they would not reproduce as well. They need the open area, bare mineral soils. And so it's essential. And they're prepared for that fire with their thick barks. They also depend upon a climate right at the border of where snow still persists and keeps the soils moist farther into the summer than it would if precipitation came just by rain. But of course, with climate change, these zones are changing, just like in the past. Species have had to migrate up and down, back and forth, north, south, and we see that happening just in the last few decades of the necessity of changing. The problem is, how fast can you run to keep up with climate? And when climate change is happening so fast right now, tipping the balance, so that just over the last decade, 20% of all the mature giant sequoias have burnt. And this is a burn that they should have been able to endure had conditions been normal. Some maybe will do much easier and better. Minerals like this whisker bush, maybe the seeds can move quickly, but trees that are living 1,000 years, they're not going to give you a new giant sequoia grow for less than 1,000 years. Down to our foothill woodlands that we know just are amazingly beautiful in spring, and down to grasslands. All of this gives us an understanding of why we live in a place of such great biodiversity. I want to finish with two things, and so I say I can do this so we still have some time. One is, are we part of nature or separate from nature? It's clear that the Native American populations lived in a way that they understood they were a part of nature. Every species just about was of use, and much of the biodiversity in California is thanks to their stewardship. Not just the controlled or the setting burns at different times to make patches of different habitat in the forest, but even the very fact of how they dug up and harvested different kinds of perennial things with bulbs. All of this was done in a way that actually helped the diversity of life persist. And if you look at the population of the San Joaquin Valley now, quick look at census of the night of 2020, we see that Native Americans now are less than 1% of our population that is growing so quickly in the valley. It was a population, again, that, as I said, went through virtual genocide. But now they have new neighbors, and the majority of us here are Hispanic. And in the San Joaquin Valley, people come here just as the plants did in hope of a better life. This is Dolores Huerta, who helped, along with Cesar Chavez, found the United Farm Workers, and is still active today. So much of us are involved in agriculture, and the question is, can there be hope for everyone, both people and plants and animals, to have a thriving way of life? We come with hope. Others came with hope. This is the famous picture by Dorothy Lang of the Okies who came looking for a better life in California. Or people like Alan Allensworth, who, raised as a slave, rose in the ranks of the military ultimately and came to the Tulare Basin area to found a town for African Americans that is not offered to them elsewhere. Hope brought them here. We have faces like Masamoto, famous person of Japanese ancestry, whose family for 4 generations has grown organic fruits in the San Joaquin, and who was also consigned to the concentration camps of the Japanese Americans during World War II. He has found a way to pass it on to his Nikiko daughter. She is going to continue the legacy after him. Others we know about, Hmong populations who come fleeing the aftermath of wars that we were involved with in Southeast Asia, and now found ways to farm. I love getting my strawberries from the store, from the field just miles away from us. And newcomers, all here with hope. So the question is, how do we find our way? What's our basis for hope? I'm going to suggest that watershed ecology is the essential feature. And I'm going to finish with a story from John Muir. Muir, when he came to California, there were the very first 2 natural parks in the world. It was Yosemite Valley and Mariposa Big Tree Grove. They were 2 little islands in this bigger area of our watershed. And Muir, after his studies, recognized that you cannot live in an isolated place without being a part of a healthier, bigger watershed. There is the basic story that all of us, I think, need to learn, as Muir did. And so he began for a larger park, one that would encompass both the watershed of the entire Merced and Tuolumne rivers. And this is Tuolumne Meadows, where he conspired with others after around the 1870s and 1880s. How can we get this bigger watershed preserved? So they lobbied, they worked. Muir wrote and preached the beauty of Yosemite until in 1890, Yosemite, as we understand it now, was made. The park was established. But it's an ongoing struggle. The Park of Yosemite has been established, and then in 1906, the earthquake and fire destroys San Francisco. And San Francisco says, we need a better source of water, that we could put out the fires if we would have had a better supply of water. So give us the Tuolumne River. Let's put a dam on the Tuolumne River in Yosemite, and that water will save San Francisco if we have another fire. Muir lobbied and argued and wrote in his deep old age of, don't do this. Don't desecrate it. It's like, well, this is what it was like. This is Bierstadt's painting of Hetch Hetchy. As beautiful, as magnificent as Yosemite Valley. This is the photo right before the dam was built and it was flooded. And if you go to Yosemite now and say, oh, there are too many cars in Yosemite Valley, imagine if you could get rid of half of them, and if half of them were in Hetch Hetchy, we could have had twice as much beauty. But that was not to be. Muir was devastated by this loss. He deeply in his soul that he knew a place as beautiful as Hetch Hetchy was doomed. So he pulled himself out of his depression and began to write his last book. It was a book to Alaska. He had taken a number of trips up there and had seen that glaciers in Alaska, what are they doing? They're carving out new beauty, new Yosemites for the future. Not one that he will see, not one even that we will see, but those glaciers are in the process of making new life. It's a deeper story of deep time. When he died of pneumonia on Christmas Day in 1914, he had most of the manuscript, Travels in Alaska, on his bed. In that, I finish up with the last quote. One learns that the world, though made, is yet being made, that this is still the morning of creation. That mountains long conceived are now being born, channels traced for coming rivers, basins hollowed for lakes. That moraine soil is being ground and outspread for coming plants, coarse boulders and gravels for forests, finer soils for grasses and flowers, while the finest part of the grist seen hastening out to sea in the draining streams is being stored away in the darkness and building particle on particle, cementing and crystallizing to make mountains and valleys and plains of other predestined landscapes, to be followed by still others in endless rhythm of beauty. Without this trust that we are a part of a deeper, longer story, I don't have a lot of hope. But I do have hope that the way that this creation runs is one that heals and restores and makes beautiful over long periods of time. And I think our task is to decide what kind of seeds do we want to treasure and keep, that it might be able to see the sun of another era. This is, I think, is beautiful. A watershed looking out from the top of a mountain at sunrise over the Sierras. This is what I love. That's why I have hope. And I would ask, what do you love? And what do you hope? So with that, I've got not quite 15 minutes, but 10.
Thank you, Michael. We have time for a few questions that you all might have, and we'll pass around the mic because we, I believe, have some people on Facebook Live and Zoom, and apart from microphones, they can't hear us. So what questions do you all have?
I was really happy to see you include information on the Kings River. Living in Carruthers, it's only about 7-8 miles from us. And Tulare Lake is not much farther than that when it's in operation. I was surprised in 2023 at the amount of water that came from the Sierra Nevada mountains. If I understand this right, the entirety of Friant, or Millerton Lake and Pine Flat Lake were emptied out several times due to a desire to preserve the integrity of the dams. And even with that, a lot of levees, especially in the Tulare County area, failed and had to be rebuilt. I wonder if you could speak to this. You have been talking about essentially rivers as living beings. I really had the sense in 2023 that whatever we would call Mother Nature, the rivers were reclaiming their legacy then. And I'm not sure if there had been more rain, if they might have lost the dams. And I wonder if you could just speak to, think about Native people who were here, the plants who were here. We've been talking about the rivers. These are really living beings, yes?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. The idea of a river being alive, I think, is biblical. We would say living water. I don't have a lot to add. I think what you've said is true. We simply have a misunderstanding that we can control nature. We can control many things, but ultimately, nature will find a way. And so I would say find a way to live with nature the way she has always worked, and a living, flowing river is the best, I think, symbol of a vibrant, healthy community.
So I grew up in Fresno, and I feel like my entire life I have heard that Central California is an irrigated desert by nature. And everything that I have been learning recently is that that's not true, and it's been turned on its head, and I'm learning so much. And one of the things that I wondered about as you were talking is about this Mediterranean climate. If we hadn't dammed the rivers and diverted the waters, would we still have a Mediterranean climate, or would it be something else?
I think we would still have a basics of a Mediterranean climate, but that doesn't mean that what we do does not have consequences on our weather and our climate. I mean, how much humidity do we have? We're seeing that right now in the Amazon, cutting down the trees in the Amazon River or rainforest, and the net result is now it no longer sends the vast quantities of transpiration water to keep the cycle going, rainfall, and so it's desertifying, not turning into a desert, but no longer a rainforest. So I would say, yeah, I think what we do has an impact, and I'm sure the amount of rainfall or the humidity, Torrey Lake there evaporating water, rather than if you just had something that was dry. I think there are some parts that are desert, especially towards Bakersfield, Saltbush, Scrub, but yes, most of it was not the way it's depicted, and I suppose it's just a way of justifying more intensive agriculture.
How does knowing the long cycles of climate change influence your thinking about what we're going through now and about man-made climate change?
Yeah. So generally speaking, what people talk about is the rate of change, and are the plants adapted to this kind of change? And so what we've had are cycles between the current climate, or the climate of 200 years ago, and let's say 6 degrees Celsius cooler that was ice ages. And that's what cycled. So the vegetation of California has millions of years now of adjusting to that cycle between 6 degrees colder and our current temperature. What it has no connection to since that 50 million years ago thermal maximum in this area for 50 million years. And that is what's catastrophic. Even the change did go quickly sometimes. I mean, there were some rather rapid suggestions that climate could change fairly quickly. But you had plants that had free range. They weren't being cut off by acres of monoculture and dams and the like. There was generosity to the habitat to allow you to shift. So I think that's what's so frightening, especially when we have all this rich biodiversity, and you just wonder what's going to come through. I think that's the difference.
I'm pretty sure this is not a great question, so I'll invite you to critique, reframe as is helpful. But I'm curious, as we focus on a watershed, does that encourage us to care more for plants and animals or people?
And that is what I hope to point out at the end. We're all part of a bigger system, 3.5 million people in our valley. And so I did not want to end without saying there are human faces with hope here. And can we find a way where all of us thrive? Leave no man behind, leave no plant behind, leave no animal behind.
Andrew Sensnick, and thanks for the talk. And when I first heard the term watershed ecology coming from theologians on the East Coast, I had more of the sense of let's learn to eat and farm using our local soil. Do you have that kind of idea in your thinking as well?
Absolutely. I think the whole idea of an economy geared towards mega exporting, it has led to a kind of agriculture that is destructive. And if we were more focused on local living and agriculture done in a way that is diverse, and as Audrey, I'm sure, is now an expert in learning how to build regenerative soil systems and the like. I think so that's my hope for agriculture, and the best way to support that is what we choose to eat.
Well, thank you again to Michael. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for being here for this first of our Living Faithfully in Our Watershed series. Rachel Friesen will be speaking on November 10th back here at 6:30. Again, we'll have an optional potluck beforehand if you're interested in joining us. I'm pretty sure she's planning to speak about the salmon that Michael alluded to as she confronts some of the ecological issues that face us in this particular place that Michael has sketched for us. So thank you for being here. Hopefully you'll be back, but thank you for being here tonight.